Then the other good thing about vitamin D is that it may also help to prevent fractures. So in this case, you can see that for patients who actually have been given vitamin D, they have 26% less chance of hip fracture and now 23% chance of other fractures rather than the hip, right? That means the so-called non-vertebral fracture. That means, fractures that are not in the spine. So actually, it again shows that vitamin D can prevent fractures as well. Okay, and the dose is around 700 to 800, and that's why until today we still recommend about 1,000 for older people because it can help to prevent falls and prevent fractures. And of course, here is a similar approach where they look at the level of vitamin D in the blood, and those with actually higher vitamin D actually have less chance of fracture, because when it's above 1, that means there's more fracture. Below 1, there's less fracture. So you can see that when it's quite low, the fracture risk is above 1. And when it's actually fairly normal, the fracture risk is below 1. And that's true for both hip fracture and non-vertebral fracture. All right. And here is another study showing that when vitamin D is given to a group of people, this is quite a large group, about 2,600 people. Actually, again, when they took the vitamin D, they actually have slightly less fracture of 33%, okay, which is actually enough, quite significant, right? It's 1/3 less. And what's interesting is that in this group, they actually give 100,000 international unit once every 4 months, which is equivalent to about 800 international unit a day. In other words, you actually can take vitamin D in bigger bolus, less frequently, like once a week, 25,000, or even in this case, it's 100,000 every 4 months. But in some cases, they actually take it as an injection. So it's not so convenient if it's an injection. Now, this is the interesting study. In fact, it was published only this year. It's a massive study with 25,000 people, and they randomized this group of 25,000 to whether they are taking vitamin D, 2,000 international units a day, or they are not taking any of these vitamin. And then they have another group where they take omega-3 fatty acid, 1,000 milligram a day, also compared with a group that wasn't taking. Okay, and it's a very well done study. It's actually blinded. That means the participants do not know what they are taking, and it's placebo controlled. That means they also take some fake pills, so you don't really know you belong to the group that is being treated with the real medicine or the group that's treated with the so-called placebo or the medicine without the real vitamins and fish oil. And originally, the study was aimed to look at cardiovascular and cancer outcome. And actually, that one wasn't very positive. But when they look at autoimmune disease, and they define autoimmune disease as rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid disease, psoriasis, and a few other conditions, they realized that actually, out of these 25,000 patients who went for this study, for those who are taking vitamin D, after 5 years, only 123 participants has a new autoimmune disease. Compared to the group that didn't take the vitamin D, 155 have a new autoimmune disease. So the so-called ratio of those who had and versus those who had not is about 0.78. That means they are about 22% less chance of getting autoimmune disease if you take vitamin D. Okay. For the fish oil, it wasn't so obvious. The difference was there, but it didn't reach statistical significance. In other words, it may be a fluke. That means may not be a real difference. And because of that, there's quite a bit of conversation around, wow, is it true that vitamin D can prevent autoimmune disease? And since a lot of our arthritis conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, arthritis condition, maybe it's good that we take more vitamin D, okay? But having said that, I think we need to bear this in mind. Of course, when you look at the curve, when they take for the first few years, no difference, but after the 3rd year onwards, there's a bit of difference. Those who are taking vitamin D, the chance of them getting the autoimmune disease is less compared to those who didn't. So you have to take for up to about 3 years before you see the difference. But to get this difference, you need to treat about 400 patients for 5 years to prevent one new autoimmune disease. So my key takeaway for this is that actually having sufficient vitamin D is important. But I don't think you can say that I need to take more to prevent the autoimmune disease. I think what is important is just be enough. And the enough can be obtained through sunlight Or if you find that you cannot go under the sun so much, it can be obtained through some of the supplements or the diet, right? Rather than to say I need to take a lot, because sometimes too much vitamin D is also harmful, okay? And of course, there's quite a bit of questions about what is the so-called maximum vitamin D we can take. Now, there are many studies looking at high dose of vitamin D, either given as a bolus once every week or once every month and so on, even once every 4 months. But there's one study that gave a bolus of 500,000 a year, okay? And this dose actually is strange because they actually cause more fractures. So therefore, don't take more than 500,000 at one go. Of course, in Singapore, we don't practice this. So maximum, we tend to give maybe 5 to 10,000 in bolus or 25,000 in bolus for a short period of time to so-called boost up the vitamin D. Thereafter, we make sure that it's given in the spread out version, or give 1,000 international units a day, and that will be good enough. Because if you take high dose for too long, you can get toxicity. And if you take more than 500,000 at one go, it may cause more fractures. Okay, the reason is that when you take so much vitamin D, the conversion of the vitamin D from the inactive to the active form is slowed down. So actually you have less of the active form, and therefore it's bad for your bones as well, okay?